Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. If you've watched any of my recent videos on the subject, you will know that I consider the Tyson Fury Derek Chisora third fight to be nothing more than a tune-up for Fury. I'm not going to go into another rant on the fact that it's a garbage world title fight and shouldn't be anywhere near pay-per-view. Watch the videos, I've said it all before, but I got to thinking, what if Derek won? And this is something that very few people are talking about. Now, I give him a very, very small chance of winning. I don't know, as a percentage, 5%, 10 maybe. I don't know. Is it possible he could beat Fury? I don't think so. I can't see it. I don't even think 10% is acceptable. 5% might be pushing it, maybe 2 or 3%. But how would it stand up if Derek was to win against the granddaddy of all, not just heavyweight upsets, but boxing upsets, which of course was Mike Tyson being defeated by Buster Douglas, knocked out in 10 rounds, 1990, February the 11th. I remember it well. I was 22 at the time, so I'd been watching boxing for, I don't know, 12 years maybe, roughly. Like seriously watching it for maybe 10 at the time. And I cannot tell younger fans, especially those that weren't born at the time, just what a seismic result this was. It was unfathomable. It blew my mind, my boxing mind. I thought I'll never again be able to ever regard anyone as a no-hoper. I couldn't believe it. I didn't watch it live. And I don't think many people were that fussed because they just thought Douglas is a complete no-hoper and will be knocked out in 3 rounds or so, 2-3 rounds. What I heard about it, because of course this was pre-internet days, I heard about it on the news in the sports section at the end of, I don't know what it was, News at 10 or something. And there was a little clip of Tyson being knocked out. And I mean, I'll put it this way. I woke up the following morning thinking, did I dream that? And I had to go and buy a newspaper to read about it. It was just unbelievable. The two fighters in my lifetime, I'm 55 now, so the two fighters in my lifetime who I considered to be as close to unbeatable as possible were Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson in his prime. Jones in his prime, I mean, I know he lost on disqualification, but and even when he got knocked out by Antonio Tarver, he'd had that first fight with Tarver and he looked very vulnerable. It looked to me like he'd wrecked his body coming down from heavyweight. So it was a surprise, don't get me wrong, but the writing was on the wall with Jones. You could see at light heavyweight he was finished. But Tyson we considered him to be in his absolute prime. He'd done Michael Spinks in June 1988. He'd done him in a round to become the proper linear champion, not the linear as in what Tyson Fury calls it. That isn't a lineage. Michael Spinks was a proper linear champion, and Tyson knocked him out in 91 seconds. He'd done Frank Bruno in 5, and even though Bruno landed that big left hook in the first round, Tyson dominated that fight, looked scrappy doing it, but got the job done. He'd beaten Carl Williams in a round, which I think was a premature stoppage, but he'd floored Williams. And then he comes across Douglas. Now, why was it such a shock with Douglas? It was a shock because Douglas was considered to be a massive underachiever, but he had talent, a lot of talent. Mickey Duff, the very famous manager, matchmaker, etc., who had very strong connections with the American game, sent out a warning sign saying that the one for Tyson to avoid is Buster Douglas because he's big, he's got a brilliant jab, and he's got a lot of skills. A lot of skills. He could theoretically give Tyson fits. But the reason he was considered a complete no-hoper was because he'd lost to Jesse Ferguson on points, which was a majority decision. He'd been stopped in only 2 rounds by David Bay, of all people. David Bay, Jesus. And Mike the Giant White, a 7 foot tall heavyweight from back in the 80s. He had knocked him out in 9 rounds, knocked Douglas out in 9 rounds. And his most recent defeat was a stoppage against Tony Tucker, where that was in 10. There's an old 15-round fight, and he got stopped in the 10th round, Douglas. And he kind of just, that was for a vacant IBF title, and he kind of just ran out of steam and didn't seem that fussed. And the big knock against Douglas was his heart, his stamina actually as well, his conditioning certainly, but his heart. He wasn't prepared to go to places where you need to go to be a true champion. He didn't like it in the trenches. And in fact, if you look at the Tyson fight, he almost quit in that fight. Even in the Tyson fight, when he got knocked down, he banged his fist on the floor and sort of, rather reluctantly got to his feet. And they say it was a long count, it may have been more than 10 seconds, but as we know, it doesn't matter. It's not about 10 seconds, it's about the referee counting to 10, and he just beat the count. But apart from that, of course, he schooled Tyson. Now, Douglas was a big man. And Tyson really, he came in at, I think, 220 and a half, 221 maybe, for that fight, for the Douglas fight, which was actually about 3 pounds more maybe than he normally came. Somebody's coming at 215, Tyson. He wasn't a big heavyweight. So with the massive, massive benefit of hindsight, even though Tyson undefeated, rampaging, destroying everyone, incredibly fast for a heavyweight, underrated boxing skills, although by this point they had started to wane, but previously in his the first few years of his, or first 2 years of his career, 3 years of his career, he actually had very underrated boxing skills. Lovely head movement, punched to the body beautifully, punched in combinations beautifully, absolutely explosive, beyond belief, and so speedy with it. He would have been the favourite against Douglas anyway. And people at this point were talking about him as, the only person that can beat Mike Tyson is Mike Tyson. I remember thinking I remember at the time, Jersey Joe Walcott was the oldest heavyweight champion, because George Foreman hadn't knocked out Mora by that point. That came later on in the mid-90s, was it 95? 90s, wasn't it? I can't remember which year, but it was in the 90s. And I remember thinking, it's a shoo-in that Mike Tyson he's the youngest heavyweight champion, he'll go on to be the oldest heavyweight champion. At the age of 22, I was, a bit naive in that respect when it came to boxing. But that's how we view Tyson. But with the massive benefit of hindsight, you can see, well, Douglas was a bigger man. And if he was to get into shape, and if he was to find some heart from somewhere, and, if he was to use all those skills and fight the fight of his life, he could theoretically beat Mike Tyson. Theoretically. And of course, that's what happened. All the planets were aligned. Now, let's talk about Tyson Fury and Derek Chisora. The overwhelming favourite is Tyson Fury, who in terms of real weight weighs, 260, 270. Take your pick. I mean, he's never going to be body beautiful. In terms of his optimum weight, which is essentially what we're talking about with heavyweights, what is the best weight to come in at? They all have different weights. He's a big man. He's just his massive dimensions. He's so much bigger than Derek, and it's just he's beaten. First of all, he's beaten Derek twice anyway, and in fact, he beat him years ago. He beat him, was it 10 years ago and 8 years ago, or 8 years and 6 years ago? I can't even remember. But he's dominated him in the first fight. They were both kind of not in shape really, but Tyson clearly outpointed Derek. I don't think anyone argues with that. In the second fight, he schooled him. So here they are years later with Derek not coming off a string of victories as Douglas was against Tyson. Douglas, of course, being the bigger man, and he'd beaten Trevor Berbick on points, and let me think. Trevor Berbick was one of them. I can't remember the other. He'd beaten a few. Douglas had beaten a few fighters prior to that. He's on a string of about, I don't know, maybe 5 wins, 6 wins. I can't remember who exactly. Oliver McCauley outpointed at some point. Definitely Berbick was a unanimous decision. But at least he had a little run before he faced Tyson. And again, once again, I repeat, was the bigger man. Derek hasn't been on any such run. His last fight was a win over Kubrat Pulev, which is, I thought Pulev won it. Prior to that, he was knocked from pillar to post by Joseph Parker. He lost the first fight with Parker, which was a lot closer. Some people think Derek won that fight. Then he had Usyk. A lot of people say that he gave Usyk a good fight. I thought Usyk pulled away in the second half of the fight and won that clearly. So Derek has no kind of form at all. But he's going in with a huge, enormous man who outweighs him. And Derek's not small, is he? I mean, in terms of weight, was it 245, shall we say? Again, what's the optimum weight for Derek? Well, it's going to be 20 pounds, 25, maybe even 30 pounds less than with Tyson Fury. Optimum weight again. So would this be, if Derek was to beat Fury, with all those things considered, been beaten by him twice before, has no kind of form at the moment, clearly on the downside of his career, in against a guy who's coming off, some very good wins, trilogy fights with Wilder, and he knocked Dillian White flat, and, what's the bigger upset? Chisora beating Fury or Douglas beating Tyson? I'm very, very tempted to go with Chisora beating Tyson Fury as a bigger upset. Very tempted. I never ever thought I would. Well, first of all, I didn't think Derek Chisora would ever get anywhere near a world title fight, but he has done somehow. But I never ever thought I would ever say, oh, something could possibly surpass the seismic upset, the unbelievable upset of Douglas beating Tyson. But then I'm older now, and probably a fair bit wiser. Hopefully I am wiser. Now, this was 32 years ago, wasn't it, when Douglas knocked out Tyson? What was it Muhammad Ali said? A man who thinks the same at 50 as he does at 20 has not lived a life. But yeah, I think this is why this Fury Chisora 3 match is such an absolute farce. And to put it on pay-per-view, oh, don't worry, I won't get started again. I've done that video before. I will have a look at it if you want. But I would say that you can make a very, very strong case for a Derek Chisora victory over Tyson Fury being a bigger upset than Buster Douglas knocking out Mike Tyson. And if Derek knocks him out, yeah. Can you imagine if Derek knocked out Tyson and then had a rematch with Usyk and won that and retired as undisputed champ? Wouldn't that be something, eh? I don't think that's going to happen, but then I'm someone who would never ever have believed Douglas could beat Tyson. But have a think about it. What do you think? Would that be a bigger upset than Douglas Tyson? Let me know your opinion. I think it is. I think it probably would be. Probably would be when you weigh everything up. Anyway, let me know your thoughts below if you've got any. Thanks for watching the video. Thanks for subscribing. If you're new, subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button if you like the video. As always, thanks for your time. Speak again soon. Bye for now.